Hi from Rabbi John. So we're once again beginning the year-long cycle of reading from the Torah. But what actually is the Torah? We're so used to looking at particular stories, the Garden of Eden, the 10 plagues, the 10 commandments, the golden calf. But what about the whole Torah? What is it exactly? The Torah, of course, has in it a lot of stories and a lot of laws. But there's so much more. There are recipes and travel logs and price lists and family trees, maps, and even jokes. It's a scrapbook from our ancestors with all kinds of things they thought we might need in order to figure out who we are and what our purpose is in this world. The Torah is quite an epic. It starts with the whole universe, the heavens and the earth. Even on earth, it just sweeps across the world, from Mesopotamia to Egypt and other lands, to the highest mountains on the planet and the lowest valleys. There are adventures, and some of the adventurers are old and some are young. There are cliffhangers and surprises and narrow escapes. There are humans and animals, kings and wanderers, big stars and unforgettable short cameos. Overall, though, there are two backbones to the Torah. One is from the point of view of this divine power, unlike any that people in the world had ever thought or talked about before the Torah came into being, known as Adonai Elohim. This divinity, this God, creates a world which, for its first moments, is absolutely perfect. As soon as the humans arrive, this God begins to look for ways to work with them, to keep up this potentially perfect place. God tries with two humans in a garden, Adam and Eve, and then tries with one person after the whole experiment seems to go downhill, that's Noah, and eventually then with two people, Abraham and Sarah, and some of their family and some of their descendants. And that's who eventually becomes the nation of Israel. They're a small nation, and they're not so easy to work with. They have moments of great promise and great stubbornness. How can God and people find each other, learn to work together, learn to finish creating this world together? God is not the narrator of the Torah. There's this other voice who says, and God spoke to Moses, saying. And Adonai Elohim is a fascinating character in the Torah. God in the text is an image of God, an image that's intimate and commanding, that's loyal and emotional. But the presentation of God in the Torah is dynamic, and not the whole truth about what divinity is. The second backbone of the Torah is the story of this people called Israel. Their founders are 3 generations of spiritual entrepreneurs in the book of Genesis. But Israel doesn't really exist as a people, as a nation, until they are lost in exile in Egypt, eventually enslaved, seemingly forgotten, and worth nothing to Pharaoh, who thinks he can simply oppress them and brutalize them. To all the world, Israel looks like a non-nation. The people look like non-humans. But God fights for them against the Pharaoh who everybody else sees as a true and powerful God. God chooses them to bring the Torah out into the world. God charges them with preparing to create a society in their land that will, on a daily basis and in a political sense, implement the vision of this Torah for real in society. How does that people see itself? How do we preserve a memory of our degraded history without being crushed by it? How do we learn when to listen to this divine voice, when to talk back, when to create something new on our own in response to it? The Torah is about who we are and what we are like. There are some striking characters in the Torah in addition to the divine. There's Moshe, the bold young man who fights for people, and then he flees and becomes an old shepherd who can hardly communicate, and then he becomes an even older leader and warrior and teacher. There's even a talking donkey. Every year we start over with a 54-part serialized rereading of the Torah, the longest running series ever in reruns. It's an ancient scroll copied onto parchment by hand in a special ink with letters that cascade and flow down from invisible lines that are etched into the animal's skin, as if the words are coming down from heaven. It's in books with commentaries and in apps all over the internet, with new thoughts and arguments in words and art and music. You can't really read the Torah all by yourself. You need to join in the conversation by reading other people's thoughts, or listening to podcasts, or discussing it with a partner, or with a teacher, or in a group. What is the Torah? Is it a book or a scroll, a letter from God or a scrapbook from our ancestors, a manual for living or an endless set of questions? How about you hop on and start reading this year, and we'll find out together.